Hey, friends. Welcome to the very first episode of Origin Stories, a podcast where, hold up, I have a new log line that was given to me by a very good friend of mine named Nexus Russ. So, welcome to Origin Stories. From past to present, there to here, ancestors to us. We talk about what moves artists through creation towards liberation. My name is Regina Aquino. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am your host of this new endeavor where I hope to have really, really awesome, meaningful, illuminating conversations with creatives from all different types of disciplines who will hopefully talk about um, how their ancestral history, their knowledge of it or the lack thereof, informs the work that they do as an American artist. Before I start, I have to acknowledge that I am on the unceded territory of the Nacotchtank and Piscataway tribes here in Arlington, Virginia, and that this podcast would not be happening if it weren't for the support and the guidance from multiple people. The first being my therapist, who gave me this idea. Well, not the idea of what I would talk about in the podcast, but gave me the idea of actually taking some time and recording some of the thoughts that would come up and the ideas that would come up in therapy. My therapist has been an integral part of my healing and journey as an artist and as a human being. So I'm a huge advocate for mental and behavioral health. If you have access to therapy, I hope that you avail of it. I want to acknowledge how privileged and lucky I am to have this therapist and to have been able to have therapy available to me for the past 5 years that I've been his patient. But yes, we'll talk more about that later. But thank you to my therapist for the work that we have done, for the investment you've made in me as a human being and as an artist, and for encouraging me to pursue these conversations and to make them accessible to different people all over the world. I want to thank my friend, fellow Filipino, JR Nexus Russ, for being sort of a sounding board and for providing me with a log line, an elevator pitch that I had been struggling with. He came up with it in 2 minutes, 2 seconds, really, yesterday. So I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to him. And a big thank you to my friend Naveed Aziz, who I was very intimidated by the prospect of recording and doing a live stream and figuring out how to edit and stream and make the audio files accessible. And he came over and in like an afternoon was like, you can do all these things. It's very easy. And I thank him for his grace and for his encouragement. And I hope they are watching. I know that they have my deepest gratitude. And of course, I want to thank my mother and my daughters for being the inspiration and the love and the support that I have, that keeps me sane and saves my soul day in and day out. Okay, so origin stories. So Navi gave me this great idea because what I want to do in this podcast is to interview different creatives, and I have a set of questions that I wanted to ask about how their familial histories and their ancestry informs the work that they do. And I wasn't sure how to start it. I had all these questions about format and just lots of things that I wasn't sure about what would be the best way to approach it. And he had mentioned that the best way in their mind would be to start the whole thing off interviewing myself. And I think that's a brilliant, brilliant idea, because then I can introduce myself to you and see if it works. So I appreciate your grace. Bear with me. I have never done this before. I'm a little nervous, but I appreciate you going on this journey with me. So, origin stories. The first question is, who are you? My name is Regina Aquino. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am an artist activist. I am an actor, a professional actor here in the DC area. I have been performing professionally in DC theater since 2003, almost 20 years now, which is wild to me. I am the first Filipino Helen Hayes Award winner for Lead Outstanding Performer. And yeah, I'm born and raised here in the DMV. Grew up in Maryland, PG County, and also in Virginia, and in DC. So I've lived all over the DMV. Currently, I am in Arlington, and yeah, I'm a single mother of two brilliant, brilliant daughters. The daughter of an immigrant. I'm a first generation Filipinx American. Yeah. Okay, that's who I am, an artist activist. I don't just act. I've also started writing. I can direct. I currently work for Adventure Theater as, well, I'm sort of like in transition in terms of what my position is, but I'm on the admin side right now. I'm assisting in casting. I'm also helping with marketing and producing. So I have my hands in lots of different pots there, and I love it because it's children's theater, and my main goal is to make children, or not children, but to make theater accessible and inclusive for everybody, particularly the Filipinx American community here in the DC area, which is very, very big and severely underrepresented. Okay, so that's who I am. What is my creative? What do I create? I just said. So I'm also in the process of writing a one-person script about my experience as a Filipino American, somebody who has survived a significant amount of trauma and violence, sexual abuse, just my experience in the world of trauma has it's it's a very wide scope. So a lot of that shows up in the work that I do, and I think I can't speak for all artists, but I can speak for myself that there's a lot of healing that happens in the work that I do. I have found that the more vulnerable the work is, the more I grow as a human being, and the more compassion I feel towards not just the world, but towards myself. As someone who recently, in the past year, realized that I suffered from depression and anxiety, uh, being able to see through the lens of different experiences has really helped me get closer to my own, in a way, to learn things about my experience that weren't clear to me before. And the more conscious I become of the way that my mind has worked to protect itself, um, and the more that I see patterns of behavior, um, in myself, the more I am called, I think, to try to understand where those patterns came from, Um, so, in writing this script about my experience as a Filipino American, I'm hoping also to discover things about my ancestry and things about my culture as a Filipinx that can inform my daily life and inform some of these patterns that I have found myself in. And it's my hope that in writing this, it can be illuminating for a variety of reasons for other Filipinos who might watch it. Um, I'm very open about my journey with behavioral and mental um, therapy. And I think that that's one of the topics that Filipino Americans typically avoid speaking about. There's a lot of stigma around it, and everybody just needs to grin and bear it often, and that's just not healthy. So there are a lot of things that I'm writing about in this play. I'm also hoping to start work on a documentary about the Filipino American community here in PG County and documenting the personal histories of Filipinos who immigrated here after the 1965 Immigration Reform Act that enabled the U.S. government to invite Filipinos and other Asian countries, invite doctors and medical professionals from Asian countries to help take care of the population because there was a severe deficit in medical assistance. There just weren't enough doctors and nurses to take care of the American population, and so they offered citizenship and help to different Filipino families who many of whom started this whole Filipino community in PG County, where I grew up. And none of that is talked about. And this whole community took care of the population of that area. And that's American history. And that's not in the history books. And it absolutely should be. And unfortunately, all of this personal history will be lost as the people who did immigrate are aging and beginning to pass away. So it's my hope that I am able to capture all of that personal knowledge so that we can honor the work and the sacrifice and the dedication that these Filipinos provided to the American population when they came here and built this entire community from their efforts. Okay, so those are the things that I create. What is my cultural heritage? I am a Filipino American. I was born in Holy Cross Hospital, raised in PG County, to a single mother immigrant. My father was never in my life. He abandoned my mother and myself before I was born, and I was raised by a single mother and my mother's family. Um, Most of what I know about my Filipino heritage is it's actually very limited. I don't know much. I know who my grandparents are. I'm sure if I asked my mother and sat down with her, I could get some information on who her grandparents were and maybe go back in the family tree one or two generations back behind that. I don't have any information about my father's ancestry, other than the fact that I know that he's mostly Spanish, if not, like he's almost entirely Spanish. His last name was Silverio. My father passed away, I don't know, 16 years ago, 17 years ago. I'm not sure, but I don't keep in contact with his family. I don't speak to them. They don't speak to me. I think I'm in contact with a couple of people, one of his brothers and his brother's children, but that's it. And we don't really talk. They're not in my life at all. They've never been in my life. They will probably never be in my life. And that's fine with me. That's fine with me. That wasn't always the case. When I was younger, I definitely wanted a relationship with my dad, and it did not it was very painful, because he just was not interested in having a relationship with me that required him to be an actual parent. Apparently I think I have a half sister. I might have other half siblings. I don't know. I don't know because I'm not I'm not aware. I'm not involved. Um, so those are the big question marks in my life. Where is my ancestral knowledge from? Um, the Philippines as a nation has been colonized so many times. It's still named after well, it's not the most recent colonizers. Many would argue that America colonized the Philippines. We were a territory of America for a long time, even though we weren't granted citizenship. We were a territory because when Spain was when the Filipinos rebelled against Spain and America said they would help the Filipinos, Spain actually surrendered to America, not to the Filipino people. So America claimed us as a territory, and that sucks for us. But most people think about the Philippines when they think about our colonizers. They were the Spaniards. As I mentioned, my father was mostly Spanish. You can tell because I am lighter skinned. I am very tall. I'm 5'9", which is very tall for a woman in general. But I'm very tall for a Filipino. And I have fair skin for a Filipino. And that's because I am a product of colonization, which is fraught, honestly. I don't want to take a DNA test because I don't think that I'm prepared to see exactly how much of my genetic makeup is colonizer. I don't have any interest in learning about the colonizer's history. I'm steeped and surrounded in colonial history here in America. I am surrounded by white supremacist and capitalist views, and that's not something that I want to investigate. What I want to know about, what I deeply crave, is to know about Filipino indigenous history, what our languages were, what our dances were, our theater, art, how we communicated. I know that there was one tribe in the Philippines where the most attractive trait that that a man could have was not whether they were the strongest warrior or had the most land or could provide or were the best hunters. The most attractive mate in this tribe was the best storyteller. And I do not think that the fact that I am also a storyteller is a coincidence. I do not think that the stories that I am able to channel as a performer are just stories or abilities that I have achieved as this human being existing in this one moment in time. I think that so much of my experience is informed by the ancestral knowledge that runs in my blood, and I want to claim that. So that cultural heritage question is very it's a complicated one. I'm an American. As someone who is American but grew up brown, I never felt American. But as a brown person who is lucky enough to be born in America, I have a lot of guilt about what that means. What does it mean to be a Filipino American? I have no idea who my people are. The Philippines in general have been colonized so many times. The largest export of the Philippines is human capital. So we go everywhere and we work, we assimilate, we serve, we take care of the rest of the world. So it's so it's so hard to figure out who we are here when we have been taught to assimilate. Um, I wasn't taught how to speak Tagalog by my mother. I learned because I went to school in the Philippines for a year in middle school. And that's the only reason why I know how to speak it. And even then, it's like conversational. I can't read it. Um, so, yeah, cultural heritage, very complicated question. Who were your ancestors and how did they get here? So, my mother came here when she was 18 years old and pregnant with me. Um, she was, she is the daughter of um, Rafael and Puring, Rafael and Rufullo Aquino. My grandfather was a self-made man from the province of Sorsogon, where he met my grandmother in during World War II. He fought. He was a guerrilla fighter with the Filipino army that assisted the American forces. And after the war, he started a business with his brothers, and they had multiple businesses, a timber company, chicken farms, whatever they could do viably as a business. They used those funds to help my grandfather run a campaign to become a congressman. And he did. He was, I believe, he was a board member of the city, and then just kept running for larger and larger elections until he became a congressman, and the family moved to Manila. My grandfather was a congressman under Ferdinand Marcos before martial law was declared. My mother grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth. She was the daughter of a politician and a philanthropist. My grandmother was a devout Catholic and a church leader. She used the money that my grandfather earned in his businesses, as well as any profits as a politician, to build various churches around Manila. My grandmother was so devout that in building their home, the mansion that I spent my early part of my childhood visiting, at one point it was the largest home in Manila. She built an actual chapel in this home, and like it had a tabernacle and pews and an altar and everything. And at family parties, my grandmother would have mass. Like people would go to mass in our home before they ate, and celebrated birthdays. So, yeah, it's a lot of Catholic guilt going on. It's a whole lot. There's a whole lot. But my mom came here. She was pregnant with me. And instead of staying in Manila, where things would have been difficult for me, well, no, that's not true. My grandparents were very powerful. Um, my mother could have continued to stay in Manila and be taken care of. And I don't know what kind of jobs she was looking for there. I don't think that that was like the concern of like a socialite teenager. But when she was pregnant with me, and the whole fallout with my dad happened, um, she moved here and she went to hotel restaurant management school. So she went from living in a fucking mansion with drivers, and like this house was like it was such a fucking mansion, y'all. It had an elevator in it. And in the elevator, there was a fucking phone. Like, why did you need a phone in the elevator? I mean, like, it wasn't like an emergency line. It was an elevator to get from one floor to the other. Like, what do you like? Everyone will. I just assumed that if the elevator got stuck, people would know. Um, but I guess you just needed that access. We had a bowling alley in our basement. So that's how rich my mom was growing up. And she moved here. a young brown immigrant woman from a country that most people in, redneck rural PG County at the time didn't know what the Philippines was. Most Americans don't know what Filipinos are right now. They probably thought she was Vietnamese, but she was a pregnant teenager and riding the metro bus from Clinton, Maryland to the GW Hotel and Restaurant Management School in Foggy Bottom. And she gave birth to me here and decided to stay here. Her sisters were here so that she could give me a better life. So I was born an American and would have the choice of being able to live and work and stay in America. Yeah. So that's how my ancestors got here. Do you have record of your family history? How far back does it go? No, I don't. I don't have any record of my family history. I think I met my great grandmother once when I was little. I remember a very small old woman sitting in a rocking chair, and that being my grandmother's mother. But we don't have a family tree. I don't know much about my family other than unless I ask my mother specific questions. There's a lot of drama, like tragedy in my family, because, my grandparents were new money and in politics. And so that's complicated, like the idea that my grandparents had a timber company. Like looking back at it, like thinking, growing up, you're thinking, oh, that's really cool. We have all these companies. But now from this adult perspective, understanding the systems in which we live, that land that they purchased and were harvesting trees from was indigenous land. So yeah, there are no records. The things that I'm able to piece together in my mind are informed by nostalgia that my mother communicates to me and her sisters communicate. What people remember has a lot more to do with how they felt than facts. So it's hard to piece together my family history. I looked up my information on ancestry.com, and even though my grandfather was a famous congressman underneath, Ferdinand Marcos before martial law, there's really no record of my grandparents or anything, and it just made me it frustrated me because it illuminated that white supremacy has taken so many things, like the initial act of taking land or displacing people, colonizing, and infusing your mind with the idea of white supremacy and all that hierarchy that exists in everything that we do. That exists, and then there's the erasure of information, or just not even caring enough to document it. Like that kind of documentation is not something that we have. So I am sort of at a point in my life where I'm trying to learn as much as I can about my family, while being respectful, but knowing that life is finite, memories change. So I need to get this information so that I can pass it down to my kids, so that stories of what our family has done doesn't get lost to time. How has your ancestral history or lack thereof informed your creative? I think a lot of the work that I do, a lot of my life, is informed by the lack of information, the lack of history. So my lack of a father has informed so much of my work. When my mother was gone, because she was a single mother, and she was barely even an adult when she had me. So, she didn't know what she was doing. And I was raised by nannies for almost all of my life as a child. The lack of that parental presence informs my life and my work. It certainly formed the foundation of my depression and anxiety. Um, and then that was compounded by lots of other trauma that I experienced at the hands of other family members, whether it was violence or sexual abuse or bullying, all of which I endured throughout my childhood. You know, uh, I think a lot of that informed my work. And I think my desire to not know about my family and my history, that escape, that denial of it, informed my work when I was younger. But right now, as a creative, what I really want to do is I want to harvest as much of that information as I possibly can, no matter how painful it may be, because I think that true healing for me will come when I have a clearer picture of where my family came from, what it's been through, how far back, like into like what specific tribes um, my ancestors were from, understanding their cultural and spiritual practices. Uh, I think that will be very, very healing for me to discover through my art. So it's deeply attached to what I am trying to do right now. I am a hyphenated American trying to piece together parts of my past that have been robbed from me, while also trying to find my place in this society where I am often erased or minimized and undermined. I think in doing that work, it will be incredibly healing and illuminating for me as a human being and as a citizen. And I think that a lot of people, particularly what I have seen with Filipino Americans of my generation, first and second generation Filipino Americans who don't speak the language, who don't know the culture, who don't know anything about the Philippines. I think that it's it's a widespread need amongst the Filipinx American community, and I imagine it's something that many hyphenated communities feel. I would hate to be so bold as to say that my story may be relevant, but perhaps my journey in looking for that information can help someone else along on their journey to find that information about themselves as well. Try not to cry. There's like deeply personal stuff. But like art is deeply personal. Politics are deeply personal. Whew. But like I flew through these questions, honestly. I'm on question 7 now. Growing up, what superpower did you wish you had? I really wished for the longest time that I could fly or that I could be invisible. And it's interesting because so much of that is informed by my trauma. I remember being 15 years old and just there'd be nights in the winter where I would lay with the window open. I situated my bed so that it was right next to the window and I could stick my head out the window and stare at the sky and look at the stars. And I'd see satellites moving very, very slowly across the sky and freezing my face off and wishing, wishing I could just fly away and not be where I was. I really wanted to fly away. And like being invisible obviously is like, it's also another like flight fighter, like, just evading danger, hiding. Those are the things that I really wanted my superpower to be. And question number 8 is, what is your superpower? I think as an adult, it's so sad, the resilience that has been revealed by my trauma, by the barriers in my industry, by the barriers in the world in general. But I don't want my superpower to just be resilience, something that gives me the ability to withstand what the world does. What is my superpower as a standalone thing? And I think it is my empathy. People talk about Rogue and how she takes other people's powers, or drains their life force. And that's such a, I feel like that's such a negative spin on it. And then telepathy can also be so, it can be misused. But I think that my compassion, it must be my superpower, because I still feel so much compassion and love and believe in so much possibility in this world, in spite of what exists, the hatred and the violence, the trauma that I have experienced, the abandonment. That I can still find compassion and love and belief. I think that is my superpower. It's interesting thinking about it. The invisibility, which I really wanted when I was younger, is actually so much, it's put on me so much by society at large. And I have learned how to minimize myself in order to make people in positions of power, or white people or men, feel safer around me, or not threatened by me. So that invisibility actually ended up becoming something that oppressed me. I think that's a fascinating train of thought that I would like to follow when having this conversation with someone else. What do you want to do with your superpower? Oh, the things that I wish I could do with my compassion. I wish that I could spread it like wildfire. I wish there was some way that, by exhibiting compassion, I knew for a fact that it would inspire compassion in somebody else. I believe that compassion and love does. encourage it, but I wish that it would guarantee it, because there isn't enough compassion in this world. There isn't any justice. So I think that's what I want to do with this superpower of mine, my ability to see injustices and unfair treatment and people who have been abandoned and pushed aside and not been given any justice or accountability in their life, not been seen or uplifted or valued, and do what I can to center them. I think my work right now is centering myself, because I still feel all of those things. I still feel I still feel undervalued and unseen. And I think the issue is, no matter how much I achieve, no matter how visible I am to other people, because I was invisible and unloved and ignored and actually minimized and harmed so much when I was little, that I struggle with my own self-worth. I struggle with thinking that anything that I could possibly say or create is worthy of consideration or compassion. So I think that ultimately is the reason why I am trying so hard to write this play. Because even if it doesn't go anywhere, that act of showing myself radical self-love and compassion is the most creative, most loving, most revolutionary thing that I can do. Yeah. Um, this was a fascinating experience for me. Uh, I don't know when the next episode will be or who it will be with. I have a nice long list of lots of different creatives that I would like to invite onto this show, and to talk about what it is that they are doing. But I guess what I can talk about right before I end this is why origin stories. I think that artists, particularly hyphenated artists, artists of the global majority in America, immigrant artists, uh, creatives from underrepresented identities, are superheroes. And we get all these origin stories of these superheroes, and we learn about how they came to be before they went and did their great works. But we have all these amazing artists out in the world that are already doing great works and saving the world by creating. And we don't know their origin stories, and I want to know them. Um, and it is also a quest to find out where we come from, um, our ancestral where. So not just this idea of like, who is this individual, but like, where did this individual come from, and ask questions about their origins that they hadn't even considered before. So not only is it a play on the superhero origin story. I love superhero stories. I grew up on comics, but not the Marvel comics that we see now. I grew up on Sandman, those types of graphic novels, and around comic book culture. And I love Batman, but so much of that superhero storytelling is part of the cultural consciousness of America at this moment. And I want to bring it back down to what creatives actually are. Like, individual creatives are superheroes, surviving in a society that undervalues and underpays them, that capitalizes off of them and uses art to survive pandemics. We are commodities to this system that are not paid our worth, but are vital to the existence and survival of the society. So I want to talk to the superheroes of our culture, and I want to find out where these people come from, the people that they come from, the cultures that they come from, the stories that they remember. All of that is so beautiful and so woven into the cultural consciousness of this country, and yet so invisible, so unnamed. And I think that there's so many creatives out in the world that we should all know about, and so many cultures and histories that we should know about. And I am very inspired by this idea of having these conversations with those people. So hopefully the next episode will be out soon, within the next week, I hope. Yeah. Um, I'm assuming that you'll be able to listen to this on all the podcast platforms eventually, but right now I'm live streaming it on YouTube. I'm going to put the audio file up on my website and promote this, and we'll see what happens. But thanks for bearing with me, and for being, thank you for bearing witness to the first episode of Origin Stories. I'm Regina Aquino. Thanks so much.